Fencer F refrain chord, which I don't know if it's been announced for a Western release, but I would be surprised if it didn't come eventually. And Dragon Quest X Offline, which does not have a Western announcement and makes me want to cry. Let's face it, in 2022, the West just isn't worthy enough. Alright, the community spotlight. Executive producer Brent McLean got in this absolutely wild import set from PlayAsia, going all out with the train absolutely funky controller for the Go game, which I think works with other ones, I would hope. Most of these don't have English, sadly, but if you're a trained dude, it's definitely a chill time. Cap Roth sent in this photo showing off the Splatoon OLED. Very nice, although it makes me realize we probably won't see a Switch Pro for, another couple of years, which is sad to think about. I'm kind of just jaded with all performance issues these days. Just give me 30 frames per second at least and non-blurry visuals. That's all I want. Kind of like a piano, full to the brim with music tracks. Champ Dancer, thanks very much for using our links to purchase some of the games here. Distraint Collection did eventually sell out after being reduced to $15. I hope you didn't miss out. Executive producer Elissa sent in this photo showing off Volume 3 of NIS Classics, which I feel so bad for joking about how I hoped there wasn't a game-breaking bug in this like there were in the previous ones. But yeah, La Pucelle has a game-breaking bug, rendering the cartridge useless in about 20 years. I don't know what's up with NIS's quality control these days. Maybe they just can't be asked to plow through 100-hour games to test them properly. It's just poor. Come on, guys. Foot Gang got in these two. That's the mini collector's edition of Phoenix Wright, I believe, which isn't like exactly super rare, but it's still a nice collector's item for sure. Executive producer God of Resin got in these games. As always, a triple helping of super rare games. One really good game, one decent game, and one really forgettable game, which is usually their rule of 3. Executive producer Instacritic sent in this photo showing off recent pickups alongside the Big Daddy Castlevania Collector's Edition. Metric Magic, thanks so much for using our links to pick up 2 games on show here. Ender Lilies, remember Limited Run did that in North America, but if you missed it, the Japanese version is a good way to go about getting this in your collection, a very good game. Mickey Elson sent in this photo of The Show 22, which is just utterly bizarre to see the PlayStation logo on a Nintendo product. Almost makes me feel like we switched into an alternative reality. Nintendo Gamer Gal, thanks for using our links to pick up a couple of items here. Chrono Cross, the biggest import of all time, it is official. Executive producer Parsnip Coffee sent in this photo of some grand old imports with Idol Manager and the fabulous looking Sense, full of yank, full of boobs, I like it. Our Luna 23 sent in this photo picking up a couple of great Switch games. Who knows if that's the original or the sequel World Ends With You. Terrible marketing all round, Square Enix. Executive producer Robo.
Around a year ago, my neighbours 3 doors down the street moved to a nearby town and a new family moved in. The new tenants, we'll say, are a man in his late 40s, whose name I actually don't know, and a girl who is about 13 and is in the same school year as my brother. Apparently, he has numerous other kids from separate relationships, but the girl is the only one who lives with him. I'll quickly talk about the house and the area too, because it's probably worth knowing. My area is a very safe middle-class neighborhood. The same can be said for the house that this bloke bought. But I don't know what he's done to it, but he's built a deck which isn't colored or anything and just looks like it's made out of old wood, and the front door is a complete separate color to the rest of the house too. Essentially, it sticks out like a sore thumb among all the other houses. Anyway, now I'd like to go through the events that me and my family have learned about or experienced with this guy before today. Everything I mention did not happen prior to his moving in. So not long after he moved in, a pair of trainers appeared on the power lines directly outside of his house. I live in a really safe area, but according to my uncle, who works for BT and used to be an electrician for another company prior to that, they can be signs of illegal stuff like drug dealings or gangs. Apparently workers who come in to remove them get threatened by whoever puts them there. Every few nights at about 1 AM to 1:30 AM, a car always drives up, stops outside of his house, waits for a few minutes, and drives off. I stay up quite late normally, and I've caught them in the act a few times now. It's the same car every time. A blacked out BMW. The driver and another passenger run out of the car with the engine running. They sprint to the man's door and then one of them returns and drives off. Of the 4 or 5 times I've seen it, myself, it has been a man and a woman with the man running back to the car at the end. Similarly to the last one, my family go out for walks regularly and there's often numerous women sitting on his front step in the evenings when they go out for walks. They don't speak much to each other and if they do it isn't in English. This led us to believe that they might be immigrants, but that's up for speculation. On numerous occasions, my next-door neighbours, an older woman in her mid-50s, who I'll call S, her daughter A, and A's boyfriend D, walk A's dog around the nearby streets. Usually the dog walkers are S or D, and one day a few months ago, D was walking their dog when they heard screams coming from the house. He immediately went back home and called the police. I'm not sure what happened afterwards, but on another day, not long after it, was S walking the dog late at night. As she went past the bloke's house, she saw an unmarked car and a police van outside of his house, almost in a barrier shape around his driveway. I also don't know much about this either, unfortunately, but there's allegedly been a duvet cover hanging out of the bathroom window with stains on it. One of my neighbours, who I'll call Fish and Chip Man, he owns a fish and chip shop, who is the bloke's next-door neighbour, speculated that it could be one of 2 things, a drug farm or a torture chamber. Torture chamber seems a bit far-fetched to me, and I don't buy it personally, but drug farm sounds plausible to me, considering the trainer situation too. There was a time around a month ago where my parents were at a nearby guitar festival, which I was performing at. They ran into a very drunk man who said that he lived adjacent to the bloke on the other street parallel to ours. My parents subtly sort of pressured this guy, who apparently had a whole number of stories himself. They were very similar to ours, but he's not affiliated with our street, so it's interesting to know that there's others around him who have noticed the same thing. But it's also very concerning to us for obvious reasons. Now, this is where I want to talk about yesterday's events. This is very hot too, so I'm prepared for half of this to be incorrect to some extent, but there's some things that we know for sure, some things are speculation, and hopefully we'll be able to tell what is what soon. So, I'll start with 2 nights ago. At around midnight, a woman started pounding on the man's door, screaming threats at him in the middle of the night. The man, presumably drunk, started shouting back through a window. Fish and Chip Man opened a window and shouted to the man to shut up because he's disrupting everything. The man shouted back to Fish and Chip Man something about rape allegations, which Fish and Chip Man responded to by saying that he was calling the police. For whatever reason, Fish and Chip Man never called the cops though. However, someone must have anyway, because at around 4 a.m. yesterday morning, he was arrested by the police. Why? I don't know. But his young kid was apparently being relocated to her grandparents or something. According to me, after 3 p.m. and my dad before that, from 4 a.m. to 8 p.m., there have been police vans parked in his driveway all day, at least 4 different officers on standby at all times, and both a marked and unmarked car have been stopped and staring all day. They've apparently been scanning and searching the house all day and only left in the late evening. I managed to watch the moment that the unmarked car arrived. 2 officers left it, took what looked to be an Asian woman in glasses out of the house and into the back seat of the car, and that car never came back. Apparently at about noon, my other next-door neighbour, P, went to the officers and nonchalantly started pushing them for information. My dad's the one who's been keeping such a close eye on this, and quite a bit of this information has come from him. So when he saw P go engage in some friendly conversation, he, of course, was right out there in an instant. Afterwards, P took my dad into her house and gave her side. And this is what P thinks she knows. Firstly, the man has already had a criminal record which we were unaware of. There's also a possibility that he's been in jail in the past. The second, more concerning and more likely to be the truth, is that the bloke's father was a major criminal and is also still incarcerated. The most common and most believed theory is that he's a pedophile and also a sex offender. But here's the final point and the most concerning to all of us. He might be out now, and I looked outside at about 11 o'clock last night and realized that his car is missing from his driveway. Before writing this, his car was in the driveway, and All the lights in his house were completely off. And this could mean one of two things. One, the more likely solution is that he has been released, has returned, and has driven off somewhere. I don't know where he could have gone, but given his track record, so to speak, it's probably not good. And two, he's still in the police station and they've taken the car away. I don't think that this is the case, however, as I feel like we would have heard a flatbed made its way down the quiet street at some point. In any case, if I find out anything more, then I'll definitely share it with you guys. As for me and my family, we're pretty freaked out by all of this, and we hope it's not some sort of a torture chamber like our neighbor theorizes. So first off, just let me say that it doesn't really bother me if you believe me or not. I just want to share this for people who might be interested. That said, I had my second hypno-regression session today to revisit my alien abduction when I was 6. I remember everything. I thought that I had a clear picture last time, but I was wrong. The second session had me face the entire thing without fear, and I remember them taking me, their megaship, their transport hangar, all of the human-looking people, crafts, the bed, the tracker, the box. I couldn't move. Everyone knows a Marcus Peterson. So my grandfather, Jim, died when I was 17, around 5 years ago, and his last months were rough on the whole family. He had advanced brain cancer, but he spent most of his time at home under hospice care. One afternoon, it was about 2 weeks before he died, I was alone with my grandpa waiting for the hospice nurse to come check on him. A man who I'd never seen before, Dave, knocked on the door and he was wearing hospital scrubs, but he hadn't brought any equipment with him, which was odd. I asked him if he worked for the hospital, and he nodded. He said that this was the first shift with Jim that he'd had, but that he'd reviewed my grandfather's file, and that he wanted to speak to whichever family member had the legal authority to pull the plug. Jim wasn't even on life support, so I guess Dave was using plug as an expression of my grandfather. I should say that I live in a right-to-die state where euthanasia is legal, so it's not like that option had never occurred to us, but as far as I know, no member of my family had ever expressed an openness to euthanize Jim. I told him that I had no authority to make that decision, and that my grandfather, who was now delirious, unable to consent to much of anything, had specifically said to prolong his life indefinitely unless he was crying out in extreme pain, which he wasn't. Dave put his hand on my shoulder as though he were consoling me, and he talked about how old people become burdens, that their families need to let go of them. Then Dave pulled a bottle of pills out of his pocket and said they were barbiturates that would trigger a peaceful death. He said the coroner would determine that Jim died naturally from his cancer. At that, I started to panic, and I firmly told him that under no circumstances would he be euthanizing Jim at this time. But he started to untwist the bottle as he walked toward Jim's bed. I tried to wrestle the pills from his hand. He seemed startled. He played innocent and said that he just wanted to show the pills to Jim. Dave knew perfectly well that my grandfather had almost no idea what was going on, though. So I called 911 and rapidly explained the situation to the dispatcher. Dave suddenly became very scared and then bolted out of the house. The cops arrived within 5 minutes, and Jim's actual hospice nurse arrived a few minutes after that too. Based on my physical description, the police hospital staff were able to identify Dave as a recently fired hospital orderly. Dave was charged with making a criminal threat based on my testimony, but unfortunately, he was acquitted. So this was the creepiest and most unusual thing that has ever happened to me, and I still think about it from time to time, and I wanted to share it. So I travel pretty often for business. Usually it's San Jose, and I'll stay there for a couple of weeks. I'm usually working long hours, so by the time that I get to the hotel, I have a routine down pretty good. I get to the room late. I usually just strip down next to the bed and climb in. Maybe watch some Netflix on my tablet, and then pretty much just fall asleep. The next morning, I'll wake up, pick up my clothes and stuff them into my dirty clothes bag, hit the bathroom, then take a shower. I'll brush my teeth, comb my hair, get dressed, and leave for the day. When I pick up my clothes, I always make sure that I grab everything too. And one morning, after I had been staying at the hotel for about 10 days, I went to grab my clothes and I noticed that I only had one sock. I looked under the bed and it wasn't there. I thought that maybe I might have had it on when I got into bed, so I stripped the sheets looking for it. Not there either. I looked under every piece of furniture and just couldn't find it. I even emptied out my dirty clothes bag and counted the socks that were in there, but I still had an odd number of dirty socks. I checked the pant legs to see if it was in there, but nothing. I must have spent a good 30 minutes looking around the room for this damn sock. I even checked the garbage can. Finally, in the end, I just sort of gave up and started getting ready for work. I went into the bathroom and opened the shower to start the water running, and sitting right there in the middle of the tub was my missing sock. The shower was enclosed in glass, with just a narrow gap near the ceiling about 3 inches high. I hadn't been into the bathroom since the morning before when I showered and got dressed, and to this day, I still have no idea how my sock ended up in there. I mean, it makes 0 sense. I don't know if I might have been sleepwalking, which I never do, or if a rat or something grabbed it and carried it in there, or if someone came into my room while I was sleeping and moved the sock for some reason, or if it was a ghost. I'll never know, I guess, but man, it still freaks me out to this day. When I found that sock, I almost had a heart attack. We moved into our first home in February of 2016. It was an old home, built in the early 1900s, in the historic part of town. But I loved it. All of the hand-carved woodwork and glass doorknobs and skeleton locks. It was exactly what I wanted, and perfect for myself, 22-year-old female at the time, and my husband, 27 male at the time. I was 3 months pregnant with our first, and we were so excited to start our family. As we got settled in, we noticed the house was very noisy though. I rarely have my home quiet due to having tinnitus and always needing some kind of background noise to drown it out. On the rare occasion the house was quiet, there was always lots of creaking and moving, mostly coming from the loft-style attic that we had. But we shook it off as the house just settling and being old. At least, that was what my dad told us. So we moved on. Spring came and we were scrambling to get ready for the baby. The house needed a lot of work, but we were determined to get it done. The first major encounter, though, was on a beautiful spring day. It was the weekend, and my husband and I were spending our day off working on the house. I was cleaning the kitchen, and he was working on my car in our detached garage. The way the home was sort of built is that you could see the detached garage from the window that's above the kitchen sink. I would glance out every now and then to see what he was up to. A little time passed, and I hadn't looked out at him for a bit. I started doing the dishes when I heard him walking into the living room towards the kitchen. I could feel his presence, and without turning my back, I said, "Hey, babe." But there was no answer. Wondering why he didn't answer, I looked back over my shoulder, only to be met with a dark silhouette of a man standing between the living room and the kitchen. In the blink of an eye, the figure was gone. Unsure of what I had just seen, I yelled through the window for my husband, who was still in the garage. He came in frantically, and I told him someone was in the house. Immediately, he went and grabbed his weapon and checked all over the house, but there was nothing there. In all of the years we lived in that house, too, not once did my husband see our roommate. I saw him all the time, out of the corner of my eye, peeking around the corners, but more than anything, I saw him looking into the living room from the staircase that led to the attic. In the beginning, he frightened me, but after a while, I don't know, I sort of got used to him being there. I even spoke to him sometimes, telling him that I'm okay if he stays in the attic, and asked him to leave my baby alone. He must have agreed, since in the 5 years my son lived there, he never saw him. When we went to sell our home, the realtor brought up some historical information, though, that she found regarding the house, and our neighborhood too. And we found out that our house and our neighbor's house was built by a brother and sister. Our home was the brothers. Their last name was the same as our current neighbour, so I figured that he was most likely a descendant. And I asked him one day, and he told me that the sister was his mum and his uncle owned our home. He said that he was a kind man who lived alone and died in the home many years ago. I asked him about the attic, and he said that that was his uncle's favourite place in the home. He kept all of his trinkets and projects up there, and he would spend hours working on things. I didn't tell him that I believed my house was haunted, as he didn't seem like the type who would believe me, but our home was listed and sold within the same day. And sometimes I wonder about the man in the attic, if the new owners are nice to him or have even noticed his presence. I hope that they'll give him his space, as they're only passerbys in his home like we once were, I guess, but in any case, I know it's a somewhat good ending, but it was definitely a creepy experience, and I've never seen or heard anything like it since. It was only in this house that I saw the Shadow Man. This takes place about 7 years ago when I was 17. For context, I'm a pretty small and weak girl who only lives with my brother. My parents live in a different state. Also, please note too that I won't be using anyone's real name. So, it was winter time, the last period before lunch break, and I was looking forward to going out with my friends, since my high school allows us to leave the campus for lunch. Me and my two girlfriends, we got together and walked to the nearby shopping plaza and looked around. I wasn't really hungry, so I just sort of was looking around to see if I recognized anyone from school around here. And that's when I saw a man in a black hoodie leaning on some old beaten-up pickup. I wasn't too surprised to see him, since this is public property, but I was a little confused that he was staring right at us. But that was when it clicked into my head that he sees us. 3 teenage girls looking lost. He's probably going to make a move on us, or maybe he's going to try and, kidnap us or something. Then, to my shock, he actually began to approach us. At this point, I was starting to have thoughts of being abducted and ending up becoming a missing person who probably is going to be found dead years later or something. I happen to think of the worst things when I get anxious. I know it's unrealistic, but I quickly turned to my friends and tried to throw out ideas of where to go, but I didn't want to show them that I was freaking out. And suddenly I heard my name. Sarah? Hey, Sarah. It's Dan. Your brother Josh asked me to find you. The voice sounds rather nice, but when I turned around, it was the same man. I felt like I was shot in the stomach because I stared at him for a few seconds before quickly breaking eye contact and looking around. Oh, who are you? I asked nervously. Well, I'm Dan, a longtime buddy of Josh. We actually went to that same high school together. So far, no lies were told. My brother did in fact go to this high school, and this guy did look about the same age as him. Hey, listen, your brother asked me to take you home. He mentioned something about meds. Somehow or another, he seemed to know the truth. You see, I sometimes have to take certain medication for my stomach issues, so far this Dan person was rather, honest, I thought. Or somehow knew stuff about me. Yeah, he said that he's piled in paperwork at the office and wants me to take you back to the office so you can stay with him till he's able to take you home. At this point, logically, I felt like this was a pretty trustworthy guy, but my gut was turning so much that I actually felt like I could be sick. I haven't noticed before, but my two friends decided to leave me. Jerks, right? I knew that I didn't really have much of a choice, I guess. I mean, I could tell him no, but what if he's telling the truth and my brother gets mad at me for not going with him? I know, I was young and stupid. And sure, I had a phone, but my brother turns his phone off at work. Or maybe if I tried to run and he grabs me, this might make a whole scene, which I honestly hate doing. So the only option that I really had, well, I thought so at that age, was just to go with him. So I took a light breath and accepted to just go with him. I got into the passenger seat and noticed that the car was kept rather clean, but the windows seemed almost like they were tinted from the inside. Dan turned his car on, which gave off a really nasty old car struggling sort of sound before turning on and drove off. While on this ride, I kept my eyes down, not trying to look around or accidentally look at Dan again, but I did notice him eating some potato chips from a bag sitting on the center console. He would grab one at a time and go back for more frequently. But that's when he just grabbed my thigh out of nowhere and held it for a second. To make this worse, I was wearing some fairly short shorts because I can usually take the cold weather, so my upper thigh was visible while sitting. I stared at his hand for a second, feeling my head beating faster before he let go. "Oh, shoot, I'm sorry. I often keep my chips on the passenger seat," he explained. But I didn't say anything. I just went back to staring at my phone, not even fake texting. I was too scared to look at him. After maybe 10 minutes of driving, I finally looked up, seeing an unfamiliar road before he pulled up onto a trailer park. "I hope you don't mind. I just got to grab something before going to your bros. Come on inside. It gets really cold out here." No thank you. I'll be fine here. I actually need your help too, so come on in." He didn't look it, but his voice was almost demanding. I really didn't want to get on his bad side, so I agreed and quickly got out of the truck and followed. He led me to his trailer as I really didn't want to go in, and he started to take off his jacket. He then grabbed mine, which shocked me. "It's okay, the Hester can get real hot in here." He then grabbed the sweater that I was wearing, but also my shirt under, and pulled up, forcing now all of my layers up. This pinned my arms up, blinding me, and I panicked and tried to struggle, but he held my shirt up. He said, "I see your tummy." I then felt as if I knew my innocence was about to be gone this day. But the weirdest thing happened. He poked my belly button and swirled his finger in it, which at first didn't hurt, but he kept pushing harder and harder, pushing my back to the cold wall and just kept going. It was horrible, and just having my belly button pushed in deeper and deeper like that, and it really hurt. I felt like I was about to be sick the amount of pressure that he was putting on it, but then suddenly he just stopped and released my shirt. As quickly as I could, I pulled my shirt and then sweater down, panicking as my heart was racing. He was laughing and patting the wall as if he had just heard the funniest joke. I felt sick, so I rushed out as fast as I could and coughed up just a few feet from his front door. Dan rushed out and tried to explain himself, but I jumped away as fast as I could. Breathlessly, I just said, I can't, or something like that. Maybe I'm sorry, I can't, and I just begged as I fled the scene. I was thankfully able to run far enough to get to another neighborhood while I called one of my friends to pick me up after giving her the streets that I was on. And this whole situation felt like the entire day, but actually probably only lasted maybe like 20 minutes. I did speak to my brother about this, and he in fact did send Dan to get me. I never told him about what happened, and I fear my brother might take Dan's side if I did, but all that matters is that in the end I was okay and able to escape something that definitely could have gone a whole lot worse. So I'm an adult now, and this almost happened many years ago when I was around 11 to 13, I believe. This most likely happened in the year of 2013, if my memory serves me correct. My brother was the same age too, because we're twins, and my family was on a vacation at Galveston, Texas for a few days. This incident happened on the last day of our trip. We had fun at a pleasure pier, which had plenty of rides, and afterwards we went to the beach for a few hours. Our parents decided that they wanted to go back to the car early, but we wanted to stay a little longer to collect seashells and swim and stuff like that. Once we got tired of the beach, we walked up the steps which led to the sidewalk where the cars were parked. My parents parked their car nearby, but it wasn't close enough to where they could see us walk up. Me and my brother knew exactly where to go though, so right when we reached the top of the stairs, two adult men started talking to us, saying something along the lines of, "Hey, we're having a big party, would you guys like to come?" They spoke vaguely about what the party would be like and that they had drinks there. They clearly tried to convince us to say yes though, and I instantly felt suspicious of them because they looked to be around their maybe mid-20s or early 30s. Why would they ask us when we were obviously kids and we just got back from the beach? I asked them when the party was, and they told me that it was later tonight. However, they said that it would be cool if we wanted to hang out with them now instead. I assumed that they meant by going in their car with them for a ride or something. I thought that their car could possibly be nearby. I told them that we can't because our parents are waiting for us. Thankfully, that made them back off, and they quickly just sort of ran away, and after that we never saw them again. As soon as we got in the car, I wanted to tell my parents about what happened, and they thought it was weird too. I'm glad that I was with my brother in that moment too, because I don't know how he would have reacted or what these guys would have said if he wasn't. I don't remember him saying anything to them in that moment, but in a way I feel like I protected him by speaking up and saying no as well. Now, I'm sure those guys watched us for some time, so they could make sure our parents weren't around before speaking to us. When we saw them, they faced towards the ocean, unlike other people who would just walk past us. I'm also curious if anyone else experienced a similar kind of, I don't know, I want to say trafficking tactic, or perhaps heard about something like this from someone else. So, before I tell my story, you guys probably need to know some key information that will be shown in about 20 seconds. So I and my brother and girlfriend all play airsoft on the weekend, and I sleep naked. I was home alone as my mother was at her parents' house for the night, and so I was 14 at the time, and I was living in a weird and not so good neighborhood. But it wasn't too bad. I mean, it's not the type of people who would murder you or anything, but the type of people where you'd have to check everywhere locked twice to feel like you're safe. Luckily for me, when I came back from airsoft with my brother and girlfriend, I locked the doors and window, but I forgot that I had burnt something in the oven earlier and I had to keep one of the kitchen windows open. I live only with my mum and my German Shepherd, who is an actual monster. But at around 3 in the morning, I heard my dog bark viciously near my kitchen window, and what I've known over the years is that if my dog is barking that viciously, I knew something was up. So I put on some underwear and I got my gun off the wall and walked into the kitchen and turned on the light to find that there was a man wearing black clothes and night vision goggles on, and they were still on, blaring a green light glowing at the ceiling, and he was half in and half out of my kitchen window, wiggling like a worm. It's a tough window to get into, but the window was about eye level, and I cocked the gun back, ready to fire, and said, "Get out of my house." He stared at me, completely confounded, considering that he'd just been caught by a 14-year-old boy wearing just underwear and aiming a rifle towards him. He looked panicked, though, at the fact that the rifle was aimed straight at him, and he quickly rolled out of my window and ran into the nearby woods. I called the police and reported the guy with every detail that I saw on the man. A week later, a girl went missing. She was home alone and there was no sign of forced entry. The man had been caught for some really vile stuff just 2 streets away, and in his police interrogation, he confessed about stalking children by watching their houses at night. He used night vision goggles with green lights on it. You can probably imagine my shock. I would just like to remind people too to keep your eyes on the lookout for people like this, and always keep every door and window closed and locked. Not what I did. So me and my best friend or roommate have been living together about 3 years now. This is kind of important too because...
Hey, what's up? How you doing?
We have a beautiful story.
I'm doing well. Mistress? That's a title. That's a new one.
Just simply not worth the cost anymore. So we decided to downsize and stop renting. But we're moving into...
How you doing, Duke?
A lot of TLC to make...
Hope you're doing well.
But it was a great deal and will save me hours of my time in cleaning and costs $3,000 less a month in bills for both of us. It's really such a good opportunity, but unfortunately the house, new and quite nice, has been through a rat infestation and was kind of a hoard site. You see, the prior resident kept her stuff at the house, but...
Sorry to hear that. I'm happy it's over.
Maybe 4 years. She chain smoked inside every day when she was there, and I don't know that it was ever cleaned or anything too, so we're definitely in the thick of it right now, getting it back into shape. Clearing furniture and tidying, repainting and power washing, outside of changing light fixtures and appliances, repairing flooring and stuff like that. We aren't doing a lot of major construction. Just sort of, I guess, sanitizing, I guess you could say, and redecorating, basically. We know the prior residents well, though, as we bought the house from his family, and it definitely seems like the house got how it was due to undiagnosed depression. Well, currently my roommate is visiting this long-distance boyfriend in NOLA, and I've been focusing on clearing out and repainting the sunroom. And I'm almost exclusively there at night, but a couple of nights ago I was doing that with the backsliding door open to the backyard, and I heard my roommate's voice. Not any voice, but his voice. I could identify it too in my sleep. I mean, we're together so much. I couldn't tell what he said at all, but it was exactly his voice and sounded like a casual conversation, like he was talking to me from out of the yard. But I knew that he wasn't even in the state. Despite that, I really didn't feel scared or any bad vibes, I guess. I just sort of slid the door closed and kept working. Nothing else weird happened, and I moved on, but I kept thinking about it. Without bringing this up, I asked him if anything weird had happened to him in the house, and he told me that years ago, while staying there, he was sure that he saw a man in the backyard and called the police. We live in a high-crime city, so that's really not that unusual, but he said the police found no evidence of anyone on the property, and that sometimes when he stayed over there, he would hear weird sounds, but nothing that really alarmed him. That's when I told him that I heard this voice in the backyard, and now I guess we're just kind of curious. I literally feel no bad vibes or danger on that property.
I just had McDonald's. I went to the museum and
the four corners of the property and iron nails above the exterior.
I went to the museum, but I didn't get. By the time I got out, it was late, so that's all I was able to get at the time I got out. But I had wanted to cook some salmon and rice, but I just felt lazy because I got home late. So
he wasn't even in the state.
I just decided to cook. I decided to just get McDonald's and cook the salmon tomorrow.
Several years ago, when my daughter was about 8 years old at the time, I was.
What about you? What did you eat?
I woke up early in the morning, 1 or 2 a.m. At first, I really didn't think much of it. I sort of pieced
I definitely probably will cook that salmon tomorrow, though.
Turned my head toward the bedroom door, and
is that me? Damn, I'm looking good. Yeah, that's you.
Changing from one color to the next. It lit up the hallway. The phases from one color to the next last only a few seconds. Yellow, blue, green, and then red. I always thought the red was a bit dark, a blood red. I watched it go through the cycle a couple of times. It turns red one last time. I don't think much of it until it just doesn't change. It stays red.
Jack in the Box? I've never had Jack in the Box.
I just wait thinking that eventually it will change again. But it doesn't. At this point, enough time had passed that I'm like, oh no.
I feel like this eye crease makes her look old.
But
This doesn't really, shouldn't really have to care about the eyes because this
I was
is just.
paralyzed. In fact, it seemed like the
Serious
more I struggled,
practice.
the harder it was to move. The panic started to creep in, and with every second that passed,
Never had Jack in the Box.
then my daughter let out the most horrible scream. The kind of thing you never want to hear from your own child. It was horrifying, and I knew something was terribly wrong. But the more I tried to move, the harder it became. I was freaking out. I didn't know what to do, but all of a sudden it went silent. Still, I'm struggling to get out of bed. A few seconds went by when another blood-curdling scream. Suddenly, though, I was released and I sprang out of bed, only to faceplant on the ground, because my legs didn't work. I couldn't feel my legs at all. But I had to save my daughter, so I, butt sort of naked, started to low crawl to my daughter's room, ready to kill whatever was causing her harm. She let out one last scream as I approached the door to her room, and I mustered all the strength that I could to stand up and flip the lights on. I screamed, What's going on? Are you okay?" And she was in the corner of her room, curled up, the look of pure fright on her face. She immediately runs to me and jumps into my arms, because whatever it was, it scared the heck out of her, and that scared the heck out of me. Once she calmed down, she told me that apparently she woke up and was just laying there watching the light change colors. Then it changed to red and stopped. She started to get scared and was going to come to my room, but then her bedroom door apparently turned into a large mouth with sharp teeth and started coming toward her, chomping up and down. Just before I got to her, I turned the light on, and allegedly that's what saved her. But how is this possible? I mean, I have sleep paralysis the exact same time my daughter had a night terror, and they seemingly were connected? I don't know. That seems way too coincidental for me. So my uncle's house.
Really? That's crazy. McDonald's is actually better. Damn.
I have so many stories from that place, to me, that prove that it's indeed haunted, but I'll begin with the oldest one that I can remember, before there even was a house there. So right next to the house, there's a kindergarten there.
Oh.
Like as a kid, just like my mum and her brothers before me. There was always a playground legend too about a man in a military uniform who called the kids to go behind the school, and then they would disappear. Even as a kid, I remember being so afraid of going to that particular place behind the school, but as I grew, I stopped thinking about it.
That looks so flat.
My uncle's house had just been finished. One night, when I was out doing laundry with my cousin, I decided that I wanted to see the kindergarten from above, as it had been years since I'd seen it. So we go into the balcony. After a few seconds, I noticed somebody walking in the classroom to the back of the school. I couldn't see their
I wish I could draw.
My body tensed as I saw the shadow go through the wall and then disappear behind the school. I remembered the story from my
Shadow Cat? That sounds like a cool name.
I still wonder if that is the same name.
It's all practice, honestly. I still feel like I don't even think I can draw, honestly.
I do believe her when it comes
I feel
to
like my art shit.
told me that happened in my uncle's house. And one of the scariest ones for
Well, that's a cool hero's name, though. I like it.
Sarah, if they were going to be eating in her grandparents' house or if they would be staying there.
What should I draw? I want to do.
Sarah, are you there? To which Sarah's voice responded, yes. Then my cousin yelled again, are we going to go to Grandma's? But nobody answered after that. After a few minutes without a response, my cousin went to the second floor and started looking for Sarah. But there was absolutely nobody there. Not a single person. She then called her on the phone, only to find out that they had all gone to her grandparents' house and were waiting for her to go as well. Well, she ran out of there and didn't come back for weeks as she was too afraid of the voice that she heard. I wasn't present when this happened, obviously, but it's important to the next story because I was there for this one. So after that, and a bunch of other paranormal things happening to her and our family, they decided that they were going to call a priest to bless the house and invited everyone to pray and later hang out with them. My family was there, with 20 plus people in the backyard, as the priest blessed the house. We were all praying and singing, happy and united, when suddenly, just as the priest was going to climb the stairs to the second floor,
Oh, that sounds really cool.
it boomed down as if it was coming from where we were standing, and it said,
I
"Go
think-
away."
I think you should try and just practice just
The lady who was
drawing.
praying the prayer yelled at us to pray louder and take each other's hands. A lot of people were crying.
And make your character.
We had just witnessed, because it was definitely paranormal. And
Or if you really feel like you can't draw it, I would say
I've ever lived through. And because of that, I'm convinced that there is something horrible hiding in my uncle's house.
I would say write the script and just have like get an artist to draw it for you then. I really feel like
9 years old.
drawing isn't your thing.
My family and I lived in a house with a fairly big wooded area behind our backyard. I say fairly. It wasn't big enough that you could really get lost in it for very long, but it was big enough that you could walk into it for a good 20 minutes before making it to the center. It got pretty thick in some areas too, and you couldn't see any of the houses from the neighborhoods once inside. To my friends and I, it was a magical world. We played in those woods all summer long. My mum would let us go in there as long as we were back by sundown too. Like I said, this was the early 90s and times were a little different then. My best friend would come over and we would just run out there and play for hours. We played hide and seek, army, Star Wars, and anything that we could think of. But our very favorite thing to do was to climb trees. We had a favorite tree to climb as well. It was a huge pine out towards the middle of the woods. The branches at the bottom were low enough that we could grab on and pull ourselves up, and the branches leading up were all very strong and we could climb really high and see a view from above most of the other trees. Sometimes too, when I got bored at home, I would go out there by myself. I'd climb real high in that tree and just think about stuff. I loved being way up there. It was really peaceful and calm. One Sunday, though, I decided to go out on a solo mission in the evening. I knew that I didn't have long before dark, so I hurried into the woods to get a good climb in. I was up in my spot in no time, and I remember it was late summer and the weather was still warm late in the evening. I wanted to be able to see a little bit of the sunset, I think, and then I would climb down and hurry home. I just sat up there and daydreamed as I waited for the sun to begin to set. But then I heard a twig snap on the ground and I looked straight down and saw a man standing at the base of the tree looking up at me. I remember that he was wearing a filthy brown jacket and he had a patchy beard. His hair was sticking up at random places, looking like he had relentlessly run his fingers through it. And he was just sort of staring at me with a bizarre expression that seemed to be one of sort of wonder and delight. It was an extremely unnerving look, almost a look of someone that had just realized that they stumbled across the gold of the end of a rainbow. That's the only way that I can describe it, but instantly it made my blood run cold. I went completely numb, like I'd been injected into my veins. I don't know how long he had been watching me before I noticed him too, but thinking about that still makes me shiver. We just sort of stared at each other for a moment, I think. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. It sounds strange, I know, but I didn't want to scream or tell him to go away because I had this feeling that told me not to provoke him in any way. But after a few minutes, he spoke. "Are you coming down anytime soon?" I shook my head back and forth. I didn't know what to say to him. It was clear that I was very uncomfortable at this point, and that should have been enough to make any decent person go away, but he just grinned at me. Then he reached his hand up and grabbed the bottom branch of the tree, as if to test it to see if it could hold him. I do believe that he may have been planning to climb up to me, but the lowest branch was too flimsy and it just wasn't strong enough to hold a grown adult. And man, do I thank God for that. He soon realized this and gave up, but I had seen enough at this point. I finally broke my silence and started to yell for someone to help, and I just kept screaming and screaming. The man backed away a step or two from the tree and began to mumble and curse under his breath. He flailed his arms in the air in a rage and began making a motion like he was pushing an invisible person in front of him. And eventually he turned and just sort of...
I mean, there's a...
I don't think anybody heard my cries too because, well, nobody ever came to help me.
There's like a lot of
What felt like hours because I just wasn't sure if he was really gone.
it's kind of hard to just like
Beginning to set, and I couldn't bear to be out there at night. I hit the ground, and as soon as I did, I bolted back to my house, positive that he would pop out from a shadow and grab me at any moment. Thankfully, he never did.
It's kind of hard to say, but there's a lot of programs.
He never saw anybody. We stayed in that house for another 2 years, I think, before we moved across town to a bigger house, and I never played in those woods again for the rest of our time there. I still think about that man sometimes too. Like, what would he have done if I would have come down at that point? I have no idea truly, but that question, it does keep me up some nights. About 8 years ago, 2 buddies and I decided to spend the night camping at Palo Duro Canyon. We're from Amarillo, Texas, so it's less than like 20 miles away. This is the second largest canyon in the US, next to the Grand Canyon. And while you may be wondering what kind of spooky stuff we may have kids of just 17 years of age, this isn't necessarily that kind of story. Instead, us 3 friends were some of the only around our age that we knew of that didn't indulge in partying. No drinking, getting stoned, nothing of that nature. So of course, we think a perfect getaway on a Friday night would be the canyon. But we didn't even own camping supplies, to be honest. We just went to Walmart and bought some and headed out on a whim. We make the drive and get to the state park at around 5 p.m. We enter the gate and set off to find a spot to
Well,
pull into this camping site area.
hopefully,
Picnic tables and respective grills for cooking.
it gives you enough to want to start drawing. Try drawing her.
Nobody was there too, so we thought that it was the perfect place to set up camp. We brought some coolers with soda, some hot dogs and hamburgers to grill, and a stereo to jam some tunes to, while we just sort of hung out and enjoyed the last few hours of the daylight in the Texas summer heat. After we pitched our tents, a truck with a small camper RV moseyed on into the site. A man and a woman got out and surveyed the area. The man saw us and waved, with that friendly Texan hospitality. We waved back, of course, and went on about our business. We ate dinner, and the sun was starting to set. I think it was around this time, too, that I noticed that the man and the woman didn't pitch a tent, and that they probably just intended on staying in their camper. We built a fire, sat around it with some portable chairs we brought, and I saw the man walking towards us. He introduced himself as Doug and said that he cooked a lot of extra food if we wanted any.
Nah.
I politely declined and told him that we'd already ate, but we appreciate the offer. He said, "Hey, as long as you guys have eaten, it's no big deal." He waved again and set back off to his camp. About an hour later, he comes back with a brown paper bag and he comments on the music that we're listening to, says how back in the 70s he went to all these festivals, and basically just sort of rambles on about how it's awesome that we're so young and still keeping classic rock alive and stuff like that. He notices then too that my friends have guitars and actually yells over to his wife to come on over. At this point, we really don't think anything weird of it. We just didn't know him or his wife, and he was obviously drinking and just invited themselves into our space, but none of us had the spine to say anything to him about it, so we all just sort of sat around the fire trading stories, as much as 3 17-year-old boys can, with a couple of probably in their late 50s or early 60s maybe. After what seemed like a lifetime of, well, making up stories with these people we don't know, he starts trying to get to know us on a more personal level. Super polite, but obviously a little drunk. He asks us if we have jobs or if we're in school, and we'll reply. He says that he works at a United supermarket as a stocker and has for the last 15 years. Basically says that if any of us need a job at any time, that if we put him as a reference, he could get us on. He says his full name for us to reference just in case any one of us wants to apply. This is important later as well. And anyways, finally, the wife starts nodding off. All liquored and bundled up, she fell asleep on her chair. Luckily, that was the cue for Doug to get her back to camp and put her to bed. When they walk off back to their site, the 3 of us sort of look at each other and eye-rolled because we're all just sort of doormats and basically let this stranger come ruin our night. We see that it's close to midnight, so we decided to put out the fire and get ready for bed. Doug, trots back over to our site, he asks us if we're here all weekend or not. We told him that we only had enough money to stay for the one night and that we'd be heading back to town in the morning. He said that he really enjoyed the company and that he'd personally pay for us to stay another night if we wanted to. Declined this offer, and he started back off.
Any other games?
He quickly turns back around though and says, "Remember guys, if any of you need a job, just call up to United Gem on Lake Road and tell them that Doug sent you." He smiled.
I mean, I think the next game I'm looking forward to playing is, but I'm gonna wait for it to go on sale, is Cyberpunk.
As we were leaving the canyon, we almost hit a deer and veered off the road. Everyone was okay, but we were definitely shocked.
I don't know if I like how this bikini look.
We basically got no sleep at that point.
Let's just focus on drawing
Us
it right
almost
now.
hitting the deer.
Yeah, I don't really get excited for games anymore. Yeah, I don't get excited for games anymore, so...
Now, one of my friends that was with me on the camping trip was actually in my third period class on Monday. And we started
So I don't really, like, look...
Pretty cool, despite not taking the hint that we didn't care to hang out with them. At some point, I asked my buddy if he could remember Doug's last name, and somehow he did, so for some reason I just Googled him. And that was a huge mistake. Because guess who was a 10 times over registered sex offender? And you could probably guess the ages of his victims. Yeah, it was him, Doug. This rocked our world completely. We had somehow, some way, just barely escaped the con-
Yeah, I'm not really... Sorry, I was just focusing. Yeah, I'm not really excited for anything. I don't really get excited for games. I think the only game I might be excited for is Cyberpunk.
Tell the manager that one of his really
because I was just recently watching the anime and I really like it. But yeah, that's about it.
Nobody by Doug's name has ever worked for the United. He had completely pulled the wool over all of our eyes all night long, trying to get us drunk to do God knows what to us innocent kids. I guess the lesson for us that night was be careful of who you talk to. Before I get into this story, I just want to preface by saying that I 100% believe in the paranormal and think that it's definitely what's going on here. My only question is, why is it happening? I'm only 20 years old. I still live in...
You start drawing from unlettered dies, but I'm just focused on this part.
So nobody has died within the physical house ever. We live in the Midwest. That may say something about the land that the house is built on, but I just...
oh yeah, that is true. I'm looking for the Hogwarts legacy, yeah. I think I'm looking forward... I'm waiting for Cyberpunk to go on sale. I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, I'm looking forward to playing the Hogwarts. Even more now that I have
remember was in the late 2000s.
Even more now that I have the Steam Deck, so yeah.
Aztec warriors doing some sort of a dance at the end of my bed. I wouldn't say it was...
I forgot about how it works, the legacy, and it's crazy because I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it today too. I forgot about that damn game.
Everything stopped. When I moved into another room,
Like I do collect video games. I collect video games, but I'm not really like.
On one occasion, when I
don't get excited for games anymore. I've been burned too many
the
times.
house was turned on. On this occasion, my brother also remembers waking up face down on the floor in his room in a sort of plank position with the lights on, with no memory of getting down there. My latest encounter, though, I was working on our computer in the downstairs living room. I was home alone at the time, the rest of the family was out of town, when I heard the door to our stairs to go upstairs shut. It startled me, obviously, knowing that I'm supposed to be alone, so I called out who did that. After a couple of seconds, a weird, airy voice that sounded like it was coming from all around me all of a sudden said, "I did." That was the first time that I had actually had
that's pretty soon.
contact with whatever it was messing around in the house. And being alone that night, I went and stayed at a friend's house. A little while ago, though, I got a call from my brother who was alone at the house saying that he was laying in bed in his room watching TV with the door just barely cracked open. He said that he heard tapping on the door and apparently turned
You know what I'll do?
tapping on the inside of the door as if someone was When he got up to open the door to see someone doing it, the hand disappeared back outside of his room and he couldn't find anyone or anything in the house.
That's what I'll do.
Other small things happen pretty often.
Because I want to practice
Keys or wallets that you know were sitting on the end of the table,
doing transparencies.
then suddenly reappear exactly where you left them. We are honestly at a loss at this point. Usually with stuff like this, there's a bit of a pattern to where it happens, what happens.
You know what I am excited for? I'm just excited for Steam.
Seems like the most random junk for
I'm excited for the Steam sale.
any of you.
That's what I'm excited for.
Ideas about where all of this could be. So this is a little story from when I was growing up in northern
Maybe there's some
Kentucky.
sort.
I would have been around 10, I think. Maybe a little bit older, but I'm in my 30s now, and I vividly remember this happening, and I still think about it all the time. My best friend lived with his grandparents for a bit on several acres of land in Walton, Kentucky, and I spent almost every weekend there. They never really did much with the land. It remained relatively cleared, but there were no farms or structures on it. They had a horse stable near the house, but that was it. And my friend, he'd received a go-kart for his birthday, so we were out driving it around on the open field. Two of us, we were having a blast riding this thing around. It was getting pretty close to dusk, and we knew that we were going to have to pack it in pretty soon. We came to a stop, and
Yeah, I picked slithering for myself. I mean, honestly, the sorting hat just puts what you want to be, you know.
Even process something like this, but
So
we both agreed that
the thing about like the sorting hat, it's not really
we hadn't noticed
sorting you. You know, if you know exactly what house you want to be, that's the house he'll put you in.
we were in an open field in the middle of their land, and it was surrounded by trees
Like-
and tall brush. But
I always figured I'm good. I'm a good at two shoes, but not like I feel like I'm more of an anti-hero type of a person. So
now,
I like the idea of like not being like a goody two shoes, and I feel like
I just remember things.
Gryffindor is way too much of that. So I feel that Slytherin is like the better option.
I remember us thinking that it was.
Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff, I'm like, I don't even understand. Like, they don't even get nobody like talks about them, so I don't know shit about them. Ravenclaw, out of the two, I'd probably, if I had to pick like one of the other twos, it'd probably be Ravenclaw, but Hufflepuff seems like, it seems whack.
I don't get any other features like ears or eyes though, but I swear this was what was making us feel watched. It was like when you see a cat getting ready to pounce. That was what it felt like we were looking at. We were both getting really spooked by this point. The sun was going down behind the tree line now, and one of us was going to have to jump out and pull start the engine back up. We were whispering about it, what it was, what was watching us. Honestly, I forget which one of us jumped out too and started the cart back up, but when we...
This shit looks so fucking bad.
The go-kart didn't have lights either, so we just drove as fast as we could back to his grandparents' house, and we told them what we saw. His grandpa said that we probably just saw a coyote or maybe a boar or something, but this shape, man, was long and low, and it was huge, and I don't know. A coyote just doesn't sit well in my head.
I feel like his body is too chippy.
Anyway, every few years I think about this story, and I've read that there are no wolves in Kentucky anymore anyway. I think that I've just convinced myself that it was a coyote or something, but the memory has stuck in my head all this time for some reason. Nothing else ever happened on his grandparents' land aside from a really bad car accident a few years later and some missing chickens. Again, coyotes would explain all that. And every once in a while, the horses would get really riled up at night, but we would go camping on his land and fishing a lot, and we had a lot of fun around there and never saw anything ever again. Anyway, this is my short little spooky story, and I wish it had a bit more to it, but it's 100% what happened. I found this place and thought that I would share this, and may have been a run-in with a wolf, a coyote, a boar, or who knows. Man.
She's Ravenclaw? I thought she was Hufflepuff.
Whatever it was huge, and it scared the daylight out of us.
I thought she was Hufflepuff. So I feel like Hufflepuff or more into like animals. I forget she's like an animal or some shit. I'm not like I like Harry Potter, but I haven't really like watched it like crazy. But since I want to go to Universal next year, so I recently want to start like maybe reading the books and getting into the I want to get into the series and like read it properly. But yeah, I always thought she was like a Hufflepuff. I didn't know where she was from. Then again, I was more of a casual when it came to Harry Potter. I don't really know shit about it. I feel like her face is really fucking long. I don't really care. This is just practice. It looks like shit. But I really want to practice here. And I just want to get used to drawing on the tablet again because I haven't drawn in forever. It's been busy with work. With a new job and stuff, it's kind of hard to do shit that you actually want to focus on. God, her face looks like shit. Oh my god, it looks too long. It's not cute. I feel like I need to bring it down. I feel like it's too high. I think I need to do is raise it up. There we go. That's way better. Fucking Christ. Yeah, it looks a lot better. That's one thing I like about digital. Like, you don't get more traditional. You can't just start over when you don't have access to control. That's the most annoying shit when you actually go and draw. It looked like Squidward. She gave her a Squidward nose. Now it looks more proportionate. I think that's the next thing I need to start doing. What the fuck is this? What is this? Take whatever that is off, please. Oh my god, that's up my whole fucking drawing, bro. I don't even know what the hell I pressed. No. 2. I think just add some, like, what art program you're using? I'm gonna buy it. Who are you making? Nobody. It's nobody's just practicing art. Because of Twitch, I can't draw nude bodies, so the way I circumvent that is by drawing them in skimpy fucking bathing suits. And the program I'm using is sorry, it's just the program I'm using is Clip Studio Paint. Normally I'd recommend it as a program to use, but since it just recently went up in price, since they're going to a subscription model, I don't really like recommending it anymore. You should only, if you're going to buy it, I would wait until Black Friday because it's not, you'd have to pay full price for it. You could get it for like $20. Fuck. Let me do a flip to see how shit this looks on the other side. No, that doesn't look too bad. No, I think I'm in love with this brush. It does everything I want. I like that chalky square look, and it does it very well. Oh yeah, the program I use is Clip Studio Paint. Currently, I used to be a Photoshop fiend, but then I used to use Photoshop a lot, but I don't really like. I wanted something that's actually made for drawing, so I was been trying to find something that was made for drawing. You know, this has a little bit more stuff that were more artist focused, and I saw that a lot of people recommended I feel like I should have changed the bottom. Just, I mean, it's not like I've drunk more. It's not that I honestly don't care about drawing nude women. It's more if I'm trying to practice figure drawing, and I can't necessarily practice. I can't draw nude women on Twitch, so that's best. I guess it is put them in a skimpy bikini and practice that way. I'm starting to realize I have a hard time talking when I'm trying to focus. I also recently learned that multitasking is not an actual thing. I don't like this bikini. I do not like it. I kind of want to break her a little bit. I don't feel like her pose is dynamic enough. Yeah, I feel like it's a little too tame. I kind of wish I kind of want to give her like a little twist. I'm gonna do that after you roll that. See, kids, this is the importance. Let me see. Yeah. This is the importance of drawing. Underlining structure. I mean, I guess it's not that bad. Let me know. Oh. Oh. Okay, let me make a duplicate and then I can fuck with this one. I think it right here. Yeah, right here. Just think I need to like give it like a little oomph. There we go. There we go. That's it right there. And then make this part longer. Push the leg more into the back. There we go. There we go. Cause that shit was missing. I was missing some oomph to it. And I think to showcase that more, I will remove these lines because they're a little too straight. And make that bigger. No, that's not accurate. You know what I'll do? Yeah, that works. Yeah, that works. No, that's not right. That's not real. I feel like cutting out. I think I'm cutting out way too much leg. Yeah, that makes it more dynamic. You got that. Yeah, that's how I make it better. And now I gotta switch this to. There we go. There we go. That needs to be chunkier. That needs to be chunkier. Okay. Smaller, bigger, back. No. One of these days I gotta start like drawing the full leg. I get so lazy about it. Mostly cause I don't know. I just like how I just focus on the thigh area. I don't really focus on the whole thing. Well, I need to start drawing the legs, but I just can't. I haven't figured out how to make the legs how I would like them to look. It's another thing I have to focus on. Yeah, that works. That works. A little bit broken right here. I want it to look broken, but not that broken. And then give her back. No. I got elongate her again. I made her look. I don't know why I make chibi women. This shit's so annoying. My leg should be all the way down here. Yeah, it's a good program. I totally recommend Clip Studio. There's a bunch of free ones too. There's Krita, that one's free. And it runs on it runs on a lot of PCs, so that's another good program you can use.
Before the video starts, and from me here on this channel, myself and other narrators here on YouTube are going to be providing hours of unique and spine-tingling scary story narrations exclusively over on Chilling. There's new narrations from me added weekly, and there's new professional narrators constantly being added to the list. There's hundreds of scary stories to binge on, from monsters, paranormal, thrillers, and true scary stories. The Chilling app even has classic novels, crime stories, and Chilling original series being updated all the time. And this can all be enjoyed with their one-of-a-kind ambient menu, where you can mix in immersive, relaxing sound effects like a crackling fire, dark storms.
It's crazy how like
Adjust their volumes independently, and a sleep timer so you can drift off to dreamland without interruptions after.
it's crazy how like creepypasta has like gotten so commercialized. Like holy shit, bro.
Try the free trial of the Chilling app, and after that it's only $2.99 a month, which makes it completely ad and interruption free.
Like damn. I didn't remember this.
Oculus Quest 2 VR bundle. There's another link down below with.
I remember just hearing the stories and just being like, whoa, this is so cool. And like now it's like
Thanks so much,
people are
friends.
making mad money off of this shit. Like what the fuck? Alright.
On April 18, 1943, 4 young boys were playing in the forests of Hagley Wood near Wychbury Hill in Worcestershire, England. They were involved in an activity known as bird nesting, a popular pastime among the youth of the era, where boys would climb the trees in which birds had made their nests, stealing their eggs to amass a collection of uniquely blue and speckled specimens. At some point in their foray into the woods, the boys came across a particularly large wych elm, a favorite for birds to make their nests in. One of the young men, a boy named Robert Farmer, was by far the strongest climber among them, and so it was he that scaled the trunk before shimmying among the branches in search of nests to poach. Once he had done so, he discovered that the tree's trunk was actually hollow and extended down many feet. Curious, he peered into the hollow and was greeted by a sight that chilled him to the bone. It was a human skull, complete with human hair and teeth. Robert almost fell out of the tree when he realized what he was looking at. But he was left in a dire predicament indeed, for Hagley was a estate and the land belonged to Lord Cobham, and the boys were trespassing on his property. If they told anyone what they'd seen, their parents would find out where they'd been, and that might well be way more trouble than what it was worth. And so the boys quickly departed Hagley Wood, faced and shaken, running home to their parents before they began to wonder where they'd gotten to. But that night, one of the boys named Thomas Willett found himself visited by vivid and terrifying nightmares. In them, he saw visions of the woman trapped inside the wych elm, still alive and wailing as the tree grew up around her, holding her in place like some horrible wooden prison. She screamed for him to help, but as much as he tried to, he couldn't, and when he tried to call for help, his voice caught in his throat, and he was rendered silent. Thomas cried out as he awoke from his nightmare, and when his parents arrived in his bedroom to see what had upset him so, he confessed everything. He told them of Hagley Wood, of poaching bird eggs, but most importantly, he told them of the skeleton trapped inside the wych elm. First thing the next morning, Thomas's parents walked down to the local police station to tell them of their son's discovery. Constables ventured out to the wych elm the boys had described, checking the hollow trunk more thoroughly, and found an almost complete skeleton concealed in it.
Whoa!
The woman's golden wedding band, as well as some fragments of clothing that were believed to belong to the deceased. The skull itself was seen as valuable evidence, as just as young Robert Farmer had seen, it still had a fairly complete dental pattern as well as a few tufts of hair that had fallen away from the scalp. The responding constables then combed the area for additional clues as to who or why the woman's body had been interred inside the hollow, and it was as a result of this search that they found the remains of a human hand, hidden among the dirt and leaves not too far from the tree itself. It didn't take long for the police to determine that someone had severed the woman's hand before she had been tossed inside of the hollow trunk. A subsequent forensic examination quickly established that the woman had been buried inside the wych elm and had been dead for no longer than a year and a half, making the date of her murder around October of 1941. The examining coroner also discovered a piece of taffeta in her mouth, which suggested that asphyxiation may well have been the cause of the death. Taffeta is a crisp and smooth variety of woven fabric made from silk and polyester. It is considered to be a very high-end kind of fabric, suitable for use in ball gowns and wedding dresses, given that it holds its shape better than many other fabrics. So we can reasonably believe that whoever murdered the woman was either a dressmaker or wealthy enough to be able to afford such expensive fabrics. Also, based on the measurements of the wych elm's trunk, the coroner deduced that she was almost certainly placed inside the hollow when she had been freshly killed, as there was no way that she would have fit inside once rigor mortis had set in. Using the various items found alongside the body, police
I don't like
could
this
make an
bathing
guess at
suit.
what the woman might have looked like. However, with the Second World War being in full swing at the time of her death and discovery, there were legions of civilians reported missing due to German bomb raidings, and records were far too vast for them to make a proper identification. Details were cross-referenced with hundreds of missing person reports, but nothing seemed to line up. Additionally, dentists from all over the United Kingdom were contacted in the hopes of identifying the pattern of the woman's teeth, commonly known in dentistry circles as the bite. Yet still, none of their records matched the woman's distinctive tooth pattern, and still her identity remained unknown. Interest and curiosity in the strange case was rife among the general population, who were disturbed as they were intrigued by the ominous details surrounding the woman's murder. Their demands for answers seemed to peak a year later in 1944, when graffiti appeared on the Hagley obelisk not far from where her body was discovered. It read, "Who put Bella in the witch elm?" But in the years that followed, no definitive answers would surface regarding the murder, but this is unsurprising. The human and material resources entire British state was stretched to breaking point in its quest to defeat the evils of Nazism across mainland Europe, and so the question of mysterious murder was most definitely not a top priority of national or local police forces. And so, almost 80 years later, we are still forced to ask ourselves, who did put that woman's dead body in the witch elm of Hagley Wood? There are many prevailing theories as to why the body was placed there, and to whom it belonged to. One possibility is that the body was that of a Birmingham prostitute who was only reported missing in 1944, having apparently disappeared 3 years earlier. The report stated that her name was Lubella, which leads us to the disturbing realization that whoever daubed the graffiti on the Hagley obelisk must have known of the victim's identity, or that of the murderer, long before she was ever properly identified. Another theory involves a patient of the Stafford Mental Hospital by the name of Jack Mossop. Mossop regularly complained to the hospital staff of reoccurring nightmares involving a woman staring out at him from a tree. Jack died long before the body was ever discovered, but 10 years after his death, at a time when the Witch Elm story was well entrenched in the public's consciousness, came forward with information that he had been involved. The woman, Una Mossop, said her husband had once confessed that he and a friend had been drinking in the Littleton Arms, a public house located in Hagley, when they had found themselves being hectored by a particularly drunk woman who demanded they buy her a drink. The men had ended up giving her a lift home in their motor car when she had thrown up all over the back seat, and to teach her a lesson, they had hauled her drunken body into the woods and thrown her into the hollow of a tree, hoping it would frighten her. But unless they had outright murdered her or she had died of exposure while trapped inside the hollow trunk, there are no reasons to believe the ravings of a madman who had later been interned into a mental hospital. And if that was indeed the truth of the matter, why had they severed her hand before doing so? However, there was another theory put forward in 1945 by an anthropologist and archaeologist from University College London, named Margaret Murray. Professor Murray's suggestion is perhaps by far the most disturbing of all the possible theories regarding Bella's disappearance and death, and involves something that was long thought to be eradicated by the British Isles: witchcraft. Professor Murray stated that the fact that Bella's hand was severed makes the details of her murder consistent with an arcane ritual known as the Hand of Glory, which according to her could well have been performed by a group of local gypsies. According to old European folklore, a lit candle made of the fat from one who had died an unnatural death, then placed in their own severed hand as if in a candlestick, would serve as a powerful magical talisman. The Hand of Glory would render anyone to whom it was presented unable to move. This candle could be put out only with milk. The hair of the dead person was to be used as a wick, and the candle would give light only to whoever was holding it. Around the same time as her assertions surrounding the death and dismemberment of the mysterious Bella, Professor Murray linked the murder to the slaying of a man named Charles Walton, who was murdered in a similarly ritualistic fashion in the nearby area of Quinton. 75-year-old Charles Walton had been pruning hedges and undertaking other generally gardening work on Valentine's Day of 1945, when he had been set upon by a mysterious assailant. The murderer had been beaten by Dr. Walton over the head with his own walking stick, then cut his neck open with a slash hook and driven the prongs of Walton's own pitchfork into either side of his neck, pinning him to the ground. Mr. Walton's left hand had been severed, and despite many thorough searches of the area, was never found. Detective Superintendent Robert Fabian of the Metropolitan Police was sent to investigate the grisly murder and wrote the following of his discoveries. I advise anybody who is tempted at any time to venture into black magic, witchcraft, shamanism, call it what you will, to remember Charles Walton and to think of his death, which was clearly the ghastly climax of a pagan rite. There is no stronger argument for keeping as far away as possible from the villains with their swords, incense, and mumbo-jumbo. It is prudent, on which your future peace of mind and even your life could depend. Fabian also claimed to have spoken to many Quinton residents who believed that Walton was a witch whose powers were feared by some villagers. It was claimed he would cast the evil eye and kept natterjack toads as pets, using them to blight the crops and livestock of local farmers. Just one example cited by locals was the failure of the 1944 harvest. It was claimed that this alleged witchcraft led him to be murdered in a ritualistic manner which involved his blood soaking in the garden to replenish the soil's fertility, and that his hand had been taken to perform a hand of glory ritual. Robert Fabian's investigation into the murder also led him to work with Detective Superintendent Alex Spooner, head of Warwickshire CID. It was Spooner who was essentially drawing Fabian's attention to a book entitled
You seem to not know how
Customs and
agencies
Superstitions in
work, Frog.
Shakespearean Land, written by the Reverend James Harvey Bloom and published in 1929. The book included an apparently true story set in 1885 of how a young plowboy had been seen to summon a ghostly black dog on several consecutive nights, and how at one point the dog had been accompanied by a headless woman. Fabian was said to be disturbed beyond belief when he discovered that the name of this plowboy was none other than Charles Walton. Fabian was also in later years to suggest that he had been met with a wall of silence when he tried to get to the bottom of the murder, telling the press in 1945 that the natives of Upper and Lower Quinton and the surrounding district are of a secretive disposition and they do not take easily to strangers. Whether or not the two murders are actually connected is completely undecided, but the fact that two ritualistic murders were committed just a few years apart and so close to each other is something we absolutely cannot ignore. Since the 1970s, some have even suggested that Bella had been killed because of her involvement in a German spy ring, but each theory put forward had been subsequently disproved. The only one that has categorically not been ruled out is the one with occult connotations. The mysterious Bella may well have been murdered as part of an ancient pre-Christian ritual, just as Charles Walton had been. But one thing may never be decided upon is just exactly who severed her hand before putting her still warm body in that witch elm of Hagley Wood. There is a place in western Norway, near to the city of Bergen, known as Isdalen, or Ice Valley. But the place has...
Oh my god, why does it fucking hate this shit?
Or Death Valley. Death Valley earned its name from the huge number of steep, sheer cliffs which, in another age, were known among the hardy Nordic populace as Ættestupa. These were places where elderly members of society who were no longer capable of caring for themselves and thus considered a burden could commit a kind of ritual sanocide. When it was decided it was their time, older folks would be assisted in climbing the peaks of the Ættestupa, where they would then throw themselves into the valley below for what was hoped to be a quick and painless death. But sometimes, fear of the end would overwhelm them, and it was then that their accompaniment would give them the little push they needed to complete the ritual.
Fuck.
It was here, in such a grim, foreboding landscape, that a Norwegian father decided to take his two daughters hiking in November of 1970. The trio were hiking along the popular trails of Ulriken, the highest of the 7 mountains that surrounded the city.
Damn, who threw who off?
To the restaurant that sits on the mountain's highest peak. Whilst on their way up, one of the man's daughters smelled a burning smell coming from nearby. but they were not nearly high enough for the smell to... And the trio soon found themselves in search of the source of the scent. One of the girls bounded over her eyes, and when she laid eyes on what was emanating such a horrid and acrid smell, she screamed. There, lying among a collection of broken rock fragments at the base of a craggy mountain cliff, lay the body of a woman, laying face up on her back, charred beyond all recognition. The trio rushed back into town, hurrying to inform the local police force of what they had located. The two young girls, thoroughly traumatized by what they'd seen, went home to their mothers to recover, while the father led police back to the place the woman's burned body lay. Soon an investigation was underway. Upon their inspection, the first thing the police noticed about the scene surrounding the woman's body were a number of items that seemed like they had been arranged in a very particular way. All had scorch marks on them, suggesting that they had been exposed to the same fire that had charred the woman's corpse. These included a few pieces of jewelry, a wristwatch, a woolen jumper and scarf, a pair of rubber boots, some nylon stockings, a purse, a plastic passport cover, 2 plastic water bottles, an umbrella, an empty bottle of cheap liquor, a matchbox, and some sleeping pills. Beneath the body was a fur that was found to have traces of gasoline on it. The police also noted that each of the items had been scrubbed of any personal identifiers. A few days later, 2 suitcases were found to be abandoned at Bergen railway station. When they were inspected, staff found what appeared to be a regular set of travelers' luggage. Inside were clothes, cosmetics, and a purse containing currency from a couple of different European countries. Only something was unusual about the items, as all the brand labels and personal identifiers had been either removed or scratched off. Also among the items was a notepad that contained what appeared to be a coded message. When this was reported to the local police, they determined that both suitcases must have belonged to the burned woman. Yet there was still the question of who she was, or why someone would wish to travel with such anonymity. An autopsy conducted at the nearby Auckland University Hospital found the mysterious woman had died from a combination of 2 things. Firstly, analysis of her blood and stomach showed that she had inhaled a fatal amount of carbon monoxide, as well as having consumed around 60 sleeping pills, well over the safe dosage for barbiturates. However, her lungs were found to contain a considerable amount of soot, meaning she had been still alive when she was placed in whatever fire had scorched her beyond recognition. She also had bruises around her neck, indicating that she had struck or had been gripped extremely hard, possibly to drag or push her into the fire. Since her identity was still unknown at that point, tissue samples were taken and her jaw was removed because of the uniquely patterned gold fillings that she had in her teeth. It was hoped that somewhere a dentist may have been able to recognize the work and thus piece together who she was. Since the Norwegian police were still not closer to discovering who the burned woman was, a national appeal was launched, urging members of the public to come forward if they had any information regarding the woman's movements or identity. Composite sketches, based on a forensic analysis of the woman's facial structure, were swiftly circulated via national newspapers and TV stations. It was then that staff members of the Hotel Hordeheimen, a local Bergen hotel, came forward having recognized the woman from the sketches. According to them, they saw the woman on November 23rd, having just checked out of room 407. They told police that she was an attractive 30 to 40-year-old, standing around 5'4", with dark brown hair and similarly colored eyes. She had claimed to be a traveling saleswoman, dealing in rare antiques and artifacts. They also noted that she appeared to be extremely nervous, keeping to her room and barely interacting with other guests or hotel staff. One member of staff in particular mentioned that she was almost certain that the one time she had seen the woman interacting with another guest, she did so speaking in German. They also noted that she only ever paid for things in cash, and at one point asked to change rooms, giving a spurious explanation as to why she needed to do so. Around the same time as these first few pieces of information were coming out, Norwegian homicide detectives were also having a breakthrough regarding the coded message in the woman's notepad. Cryptologists had come to the conclusion that the codes were a list of locations the woman had visited, along with the dates and times of her visits.
Yeah.
Reference with handwritten handwritten check and forms at various hotels, detectives were able to determine that the mystery
That scared the shit out of me.
around Europe under a variety of fake names, using a series of forged documents, all the while claiming to
Thank
be a
you,
citizen.
Darth Kratos, for the follow. Arigato gozaimashita.
They claim that the woman was blonde
Damn.
and spoke Flemish during her one rare interaction with the guest.
Shit scared me.
After months of investigation and a huge amount of resources poured into the inquiry, all hope of identifying the woman was lost, and the case seemed to be destined to remain unsolved. Despite strong evidence to the contrary, authorities were forced to conclude that the burned woman had ended her own life, since she had ingested a huge quantity of sleeping pills. And so, on February 5th, 1971, the mysterious burned woman was buried in an unmarked grave in Bergen's Molendal Cemetery. Only a handful of the Bergen police force were in attendance, and it appeared that others would be buried with her.
Thank
Since
you.
then, a number of theories and developments came to the fore, which may well shed more light on who exactly she was, and why she had to die in such a violent, untimely manner. Naturally, due to the highly suspicious circumstances surrounding the woman's death, it wasn't long before some people suspected a cover-up, instigated by the Norwegian National Criminal Investigation Service. Given that the incident occurred during the height of the Cold War, some believe that the woman was some kind of spy, and indeed the 9 fake passports found in her possession pointed to the involvement of a highly effective and professional organization. There is also the fact that the woman's murder could be linked to a number of other mysterious disturbances that had taken place in 1960s Norway. Each had taken place suspiciously close to a military base, and had since been irrefutably linked into international espionage activities. In more recent times, declassified Norwegian national defense records have revealed that the woman's movements throughout Europe seemed to mirror top-secret tests of the new Penguin missile, a medium-ranged, guided anti-ship missile that was set to be the bane of the Soviet Navy should the Cold War suddenly turn hot. This has been supposedly backed up by the eyewitness's testimony of the Norwegian fisherman, who has since claimed that he recognized composite sketches of the woman, having seen her while observing military exercises around the Norwegian city of Stavanger. However, after 35 long years of half-truths and dead ends, a witness finally came forward with perhaps the most significant piece of information to date. A resident of the city of Bergen came forward in 2005 after seeing one of the composite sketches put together in the initial aftermath of the charred body's discovery. He claimed that the drawing of the woman's face was uncannily similar to that of a woman that he had seen around 5 days before the scorched body was found. He had been hiking on another one of the mountains that surrounded Bergen called Fløyen, when he noticed a person in rather unusual attire. Instead of the standard warm and waterproof outdoor wear as is normally worn by hill hikers, he saw a woman dressed in light, casual clothing. According to the man's testimony, she seemed resigned, even melancholy, and for a moment seemed as if though she might say something to him, although she never did. It was then that the man noticed that the woman was being followed by 2 men wearing warm, heavy coats that had a distinctly foreign look to them. When pushed as to what exactly he meant by this, the man claimed they had very dark hair and eyes and were engaged in an intense conversation that they immediately ceased once they detected his presence further up the trail. The man also claimed he had gone to the police once the national inquiry had been launched to report the encounter, but was visited by high-ranking Norwegian security officers who had told him to forget about what he'd seen. Obviously, the man's account gives a large amount of credence to the idea that there was some kind of cover-up over the Isdale woman's death, especially when coupled with the overwhelming evidence that she was in fact murdered and had not actually taken her own life. There are many unanswered questions regarding the Isdale woman, and as the years go by, it seems less and less likely that we will ever have the answers to them. But what seems abundantly clear is that she didn't die of her own volition. More often than not, those that take their own lives leave a note of some description, explaining why they did so, or at least as a means to say the last goodbyes to those who are dear to them. It is invariably a solitary act. They do not carry spare clothes with them. They do not scrub their belongings of identifiers, and they most certainly do not set themselves on fire whilst incapacitated. We can safely conclude that the Isdale woman was murdered in some way, and what was becoming increasingly clear is that someone, or some collection of individuals, has done everything in their power to bury the investigation, as well as her true identity.
Fuck, how do I do that shit again? How do I do a layer mask?
I, 26-year-old male, set out to travel the world. Being straight out of college had left me in debt, ever more desperate for any job I was overqualified for, and generally depressed. I felt isolated and alone in my small town in Washington, and found the only way to get out was to travel. My high school buddies suggested I look into woofing and volunteer as a way to travel cheap, and so I did. The way it works is quite simple. You work for around 25 hours a week on some farm for food and housing. The draw is that since the community of cheap travelers is quite big, it's a great way to meet new people and get outside your comfort zone and figure life out. Fast forward 8 months, and I am a seasoned cow poop shop. Started out in Washington, Oregon, and went south to California. There I was able to save some money. I was paid under the table for some extra work and was now faced with the decision: where to go in the world. The excitement of being able to purchase a ticket to almost anywhere in the world got the best of me, and on the advice of my dumb hippie volunteering partner, I chose it at random. I went to a randomizer website and clicked the country button. Georgia. The country of Georgia. To say I didn't know anything about it was an understatement, but the fear of the unknown made it exciting and exotic somehow, and so I did it. I purchased a ticket and started browsing few options, and most were remote and hadn't even an internet connection. I messaged every single one because few ever responded, and got a response from one farm on top of a mountain. The pictures showed a traditional Georgian stone house with a large garden out in the back, a family with several cheerful children, grandparents having dinner, animals. It seemed warm and inviting. The description was written in good English, and the requirements for work seemed reasonable. I was excited. After I flew into Tbilisi, the capital, I followed the directions that they have sent to locate the farm, which wasn't an easy task. Few in Georgia speak English. The roads are messed up since few have been maintained since the fall of the Soviet Union, and the country is generally poor.
Damn, he meant Georgia. He meant actual fucking Georgia.
Serpentine roads and paths to get to that desired blue pin on my map. It was a dirt path leading up a steep hill into a national park up in the north of the country. There was nothing for miles on end but trees in their silence. As I got up the hill, I saw the house about half a mile away on an even steeper hill surrounded by the trees. From that viewpoint,
Clipping masks work in Clip Studio Paint. So let's get into it. Right here, I've got my line art on one layer.
Yeah, get to the point.
Color underneath. So with clipping masks, what they basically do is they stop everything from showing up if there are not pixels underneath. What does that mean? So if I want to shade this star, I'm going to pick a shading color and I'm going to start going in. So I would have to do one of two things. I would have to meticulously try to color.
Oh my god, get to the point. This is a clip, like a short. It's explaining the whole shit.
If I hit this little button right here, it automatically
Clips to layer below. Let me see something. Is that what I need to do? There we go. Thank you. That's all you had to say.
overgrown, brown, and dreary. As I walked past the gate, Geary, the apparent owner, approached me. He was a heavy, small, middle-aged guy with a big smile on his face. He shook my hand and in broken English started to show me around. He also smelled of booze. As he was showing me around, I noticed that there wasn't anyone there but us. I asked about his wife and kids, and he brushed that aside and said something to the extent, "They're away right now." By this point, I am creeped out. From browsing around, it was apparent that the farm was in deep decline. Apple trees and crops were dying. The roof of the small barn caved in. the house itself full of trash and smelling of mold. It was obvious that Geary was going through a rough patch, but I wasn't going to turn around and just leave in the middle of nowhere without a plan, having not slept for the past 36 hours. It was evening, and after feeding me well and trying as best as he could to hold a conversation in English, Geary showed me to my room on the second floor, and I went to sleep. I almost immediately blacked out from the exhaustion and stress, and would have slept for 10 hours if I wasn't awoken by a strange noise in the middle of the night. I sounded like something metallic and heavy being dragged across the wooden floor. In that sleepy in-between state, I listened to it for a few minutes, thought nothing of it, and went back to sleep once it stopped. In the morning, Geary, now sober and grumpy, asked me to repair some of the windows and doors in the house, as he himself planned to go and fetch some components in a nearby village. Again, I got this weird feeling creeping down my spine. Something wasn't right. He didn't maintain eye contact and was evasive. There was no cell reception, no internet. Once he left, I checked around the house to get a general idea of the place, and it became apparent that the place was hardly ever lived in, like one of those abandoned houses. There was broken furniture, newspapers and old photos on the floor, a shattered mirror. I took my phone and looked through the saved listing again. The photos didn't match neither the backyard, the garden, or the walls. Geary wasn't in any of them. It was a completely different house. Now by this point, I am full-blown panicking. I pack my stuff and start to leave when I see a group of 3 men going up that first hill. There aren't any other paths I can take, so I go behind the house and rush down this hill into the forest. After some time, I stop and listen. I hear them in the house. They're clearly looking for me. Afraid of making any noise, I remain still, hidden behind a bush. I don't know how long I waited, but they were persistent. At some point, I hear them leave, so I count until some large number and proceed back into the house and path, and once I find it's all clear, I book it out of there. Never ran this fast again, and I'm still in the middle of nowhere. No traffic, no public transport. I reach a paved road and start walking in the general direction from where I remember coming. Hours go by, and finally a car drives by and stops. Now, in a horror movie, this would have been Geary and his friends, but this was actually a really nice Russian family that gave me a ride to town. The listing disappeared from the website in a few days after I left, and I haven't heard from Geary since. I've yet to make sense of that experience. I've traveled since and volunteered too. Some people, once they hear this story, laugh and say that the guy was coming over with a couple of friends from the village to have a chat over a few beers. Some say he was bound to kidnap and kill me. But I trust my gut feeling. Something was really not right. So I hope to God I never meet Geary and his friends again. Jonathan Luna was born on October 21st, 1965 in New York City, son to a Filipino father and an African-American mother, and spent his formative years in the Patterson Housing Project near Yankee Stadium in the South Bronx. John made his parents as proud as can be, not only being the first in his family to go to college, but receiving a first-class undergraduate degree in law from Fordham University. He later studied at the University of North Carolina School of Law, where he was roommates with Reggie Shufford, who would later go on to be executive director of the ACLU of Pennsylvania. During the 90s, Luna worked at Arnold & Porter in Washington, D.C., as well as the Federal Trade Commission, serving as a prosecutor in the Brooklyn borough of New York City before moving to Baltimore, Maryland to become an assistant United States attorney. Luna married obstetrician Angela Hopkins on August 29, 1993, and together they had 2 children. They were the modern nuclear family, leading joy-filled lives for many years. That was until tragedy struck, a tragedy that would raise many questions in the years to come. While Jonathan was employed as an assistant United States attorney in Elk Ridge, Baltimore, his focus was on the highly noble task of convicting violent predators for their heinous crimes that they perpetrated. It was on the morning of the 4th of December 2003 that Jonathan left his home and headed to the office. The case he was involved with at the time revolved around two individuals who were suspected of dealing heroin out of their record label studios, known almost comically as Stash House Records. One of these men also happened to be facing a charge for homicide. Jonathan worked all day and late into the evening on a plea deal that was about to be offered to one of the supposed drug dealers, finally calling one of his colleagues around 9 that night to inform them that he was only just about to head back home. Yet according to the office's time clock, Jonathan didn't actually leave until around 20 minutes to midnight, and although he required prescription glasses to drive, he left them behind at the office. Information taken from CCTV cameras and Luna's credit card records indicate that he drove to the state of Delaware at around 1 in the morning, where he withdrew $200 from an ATM machine. He then drove through New Jersey and into Pennsylvania, where his credit card was used once again to withdraw cash from a bank machine. Luna's Easy Pass had been recorded as being used, but for some reason, after entering Delaware, he started to purchase toll tickets. The following morning, at around 5:30, an employee of Senseneg & Weaver, a well drilling company in Denver, Pennsylvania, spotted the vehicle parked up behind the main building. He saw that blood had been smeared over the door and front fender, as well as there being a puddle of blood on the back seat. There was blood-stained cash all around the vehicle's interior. The drilling worker quickly called the police, and after a brief search of the area, Jonathan's dead body was found in a nearby creek. He had suffered more than 30 stab wounds and inflicted with his own penknife, having received knife wounds to his throat and genitals. Yet the actual cause of death was drowning from having fallen into the creek itself. Due to the puddle of blood in the back seat of the vehicle, investigators deduced that Luna had sustained the majority of his wounds while seated there. Police also found unidentified fingerprints in the blood, including unidentified blood which indicated that not only was Luna not alone back there, but that he had actually fought back against his assailant before succumbing to his wounds. This is where the case gets weird. Very weird. At first, the death was ruled an obvious homicide, one in which whoever had attacked Jonathan had initially been repelled by the man's own knife, before wresting it from him and using it to take his life. However, an FBI agent ordered the pathologist in charge of the post-mortem to chance his verdict to him ending his own life, despite the fact that Luna had wounds to his back that he could not possibly have inflicted on himself. Then a series of bizarre rumors involving Luna began to circulate around the media, some which asserting that he was involved in the embezzlement of $36,000. A reporter from the Baltimore Sun received an anonymous tip that Luna was also terrified of being found that he had ended his own life, though the source would provide absolutely no evidence of this. But there was also ample evidence that Luna was building a strong case against a ring of violent predators, some of which were employed at high levels of the federal government. It is possible that he was assassinated as a result of this very investigation. And why in the world would an FBI agent have such an obvious example of murder ruled as him ending his own life? We may never know just why such a good man was murdered in such a violent fashion, but what's clear is that no one has ever been convicted or even arrested for his involvement in that death. And given that there must have been ample forensic evidence, this makes for some very disturbing implications indeed. In 2004, in the sleepy Chicago suburb of Aurora, Illinois, Amy Pitson would give birth to her firstborn son. After some deliberation, she and her husband James would name the boy Timothy. The first 6 years of the boy's life were happy and uneventful, and we have every reason to believe that he was loved and well looked after by his two young parents. He had an extensive collection of relatives that he visited regularly.
That looks like shit.
Just as much as his own
Alright.
parents did.
I think I'm
He and his
done.
family were headed towards a tragedy that would confound and puzzle all that became familiar with it, a mystery that would remain
I think it's
unsolved.
good as enough as a study.
On the morning of May 11, 2011, James Pitson woke up, made breakfast for himself and his son, and then drove the boy to his kindergarten class over at
Alright, I'm gonna go now. Thank you for watching my stream.
to work.
Adios. Sleep tight.
A short while
Or have a good day.
Amy pits